Well, welcome back to our regular viewers and welcome to our new viewers. This is Wednesday Night Sessions. I am your host, Mitch Nobis. This episode will come out probably sometime in July. We pre-record them, so it's always a bit of a question mark. I did want to give a very quick preamble before we get to our guest today. Our guest is Joan Kwon Glass, one of my favorite, to me, new poets. I mean, she's been writing for a while, but I only just discovered her within the last year. And she's a phenomenal writer, like everybody we have on this show. I don't usually have the books handy, but her book is actually right here. I recently read Night Swim, and it is a phenomenal kind of contemplation of grief. I'll let, if Joan wants to give any more context for it, I'll kind of let her do that. But I wanted to mention that because the universe works in mysterious ways. And as we're recording this episode, it's the weekend following people always say, like, talk about these things politely. I'm not even sure how. It's the weekend following the most recent unnecessary, gruesome mass shooting, another one in an elementary school, the sort of thing that after the one in Connecticut, you thought could never happen again. And of course, if you don't change anything, it will happen again. I'll pause my politics there, but it is a week when the vast majority of us are deeply in grief. So I thought it was interesting, Kismet, that the universe set it up that this is the week we're recording with Joan, who has written some tremendous poetry on grief. So I'll shut up there and just say, like, Joan, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. And it is weird timing, but I'm very glad that we have you on at this point in time. So I'll toss it over to you, and then we'll be back after the reading for 2 questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitch. I wanted to start by saying that almost all of my work, or all of my work, can be very difficult to listen to. I have 2 books that have been published. Mitch held up one of them, which is Night Swim, out through Diode Editions. I also have a chapbook called How to Make Pancakes for a Dead Boy, which came out through Small Harbor Publishing. And both books are about the loss of my sister and her 11-year-old son to suicide in 2017. I actually am a Michigan native. I spent my childhood living in Michigan in West Bloomfield and Bloomfield Hills. I went to Andover High School, so I'm very familiar with the Farmington community. In fact, I did a reading at the library on Zoom a few weeks ago. So the events that I will be reading poems about actually took place in Troy and in Clawson, which is where my sister lived. And I do want to say that my nephew took his life with an unsecured handgun. It was an unsecured, loaded handgun. And I won't shut down the politics of that, because I do believe that the political is personal. It's always personal. And I do believe in tighter gun control. So I wanted to put that out there. I'm going to read one poem from Night Swim, one poem from a forthcoming collection, which will be out in a couple of weeks through Milk and Cake Press. And I'll give a little preview of that book as well before I stop. Okay. So I'm going to read, I just have to find it, hang on one second. I think I'm going to read How to Make Pancakes for a Dead Boy, which is the title poem of one of my books. And I'm choosing this poem because of the week that we've had. I want you to try to imagine, or maybe you don't have to imagine because you have lost a child suddenly, unexpectedly, possibly in a way that was violent. Try to imagine a recent loss of a child or someone who has lost a child unexpectedly and doing something following in the weeks or months after that remind you of something that you did for that child. And this is the experience that I had. This is one of the first poems that I wrote after losing my 11-year-old nephew to suicide. How to make pancakes for a dead boy. First, crack the egg into a sinkhole of grief. Measure the ingredients, then stir until the lumps no longer resemble bullets. Try not to see him standing at your side at age 6, front teeth missing, pulling on your sleeve to whisper with a grin, "Auntie, please add extra chocolate chips." Run the electric beaters until you can no longer hear his voice as a toddler or the snap and boom of his first and last shot. Pour the batter onto the griddle while the pancakes rise. Read his suicide note again. Try to make sense of it and get nowhere. Cut the pancakes into bite-sized pieces. Sweeten the plate as you scream. That is a poem from Night Swim, which is available through Diode Editions. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem from my forthcoming book. So you just have to pull it up. Usually I have this stuff ready on my computer, but I was enjoying talking to Mitch a little bit too much and I forgot to do it. Okay, this poem, it will be, like I said, in my forthcoming collection through Milk and Cake Press. And the entire collection is about recovery from active addiction. I have 7 years clean and sober through a 12-step fellowship. This poem is a love song to that program, and it's a love song to the process of recovery. The name of it is Hymn to Church Basements. Hymn to Church Basements. This world loves a grand cathedral, its righteousness and pulpit, purported sanctuary of redemption, holy spire and stilled saints, history of fire and painted glass, pews where congregants pray and worship, troubled by questions they hope someone has answers to. They wait on their knees to be forgiven. But where are the songs of praise for church basements, that lower level, that rock bottom room, sunken and reverent with flickering lights, water-stained ceilings and coffee-stained carpets, its full moon of chairs that appear every night at 8 o'clock because a crackhead made a commitment? People don't kneel in church basements. Instead, we squat against walls and stand arms crossed in doorways. We sit slouched and messy, look into each other's eyes and say, "I'm an addict and I don't want to die. And oh God, is this not a kind of miracle?" I prefer my angels banged up and salty, chubby from eating cookies instead of shooting dope. They pull splinters from their wings, hug the newcomer too tightly, shake their heads at me when I don't raise my hand to share. No matter how tough I try to look, no matter how long it takes, they say, "Keep coming back, kid." Tonight, the addict who overdosed last month, the one who had to be revived with Narcan, is making the coffee. That's one of my favorite poems. You could probably tell by the way that I read it. I always feel that one in my chest because I have a lot of gratitude for 12-step programs. Okay, the next poem, I didn't mention actually that I'm a middle school teacher. I teach 6th grade at a town in Connecticut. And so part of being a teacher is performing lockdown drills on a regular basis and having to remain calm and remember the rules and follow the procedures while also keeping a class of sometimes 24 or 25, 10 and 11-year-olds quiet and still for quite a long time sometimes. In light of the loss that this country has suffered, and just the horrors of it, it's really hard to even know, like Mitch said, how to talk about it. And generally, when I can't figure out how to think, feel, or talk about something, there's a poem that needs to be written. And I wrote this poem about the experience of performing a lockdown drill and trying to find the sacred in every day as an educator. This is called Cloister, and it was published in the online literary journal Dialogist. Cloister. Some days this classroom reminds me of a temple. Pink Post-it notes dapple the landscape, unexpected cherry blossoms with vocabulary terms like harbinger and solace written in pre-adolescent scrawl. At least once every period, a student knocks a hydro flask off their desk. When it hits the ground like a struck gong, like a body, my heart races, and suddenly alarmed, I can feel how alive I am, how badly my body wants to protect me from danger. A boy with earbuds slumps into his chair, pulls a red hoodie over his head, a monk readying himself in prayer, leaning defiance into his computer screen. I think of the Korean nuns who wander the grounds of mountaintop monasteries, hunched over, spines riddled with scoliosis, hands forming knots behind their backs. Reverence can be hard to recognize. Sometimes it looks like the weary, determined body bending into the next hour, the arc of one's instinct. In an active shooter drill, we pull the shades to make us invisible in case the perpetrator climbs onto the roof and tries to kill us by firing through the windows. Students huddle on the floor in the corner, furthest from the door, knees drawn up against their chests. Their eyes shine in the sudden darkness. Two boys toss a bottle cap between them, and it clinks, echoes into the hallway beneath the locked door. A group of children unafraid is called a cloister. I cast dirty looks in their direction as if to say, if this was real, you'd be dead by now. Thank you for listening. That's all I got, Mitch. Well, that's all it got, but that's, I'm done reading.
Oh, thank you, Joan. Those were incredible.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, hard. This is going to end up being a preamble to my question for you, but hard to listen to, but also so wonderful to listen to at the end of a week like this. Grief, man. I don't, I could try to be profound, but it just boils down to like grief. So thank you for reading those. And we've talked before, like I'm a teacher also. So, the whole notion of lockdowns, very, very powerful. Somebody on Twitter yesterday said something like, how many teachers, one of those like, please retweet, I'm trying to prove something tweets, and like how many teachers have been in a lockdown. And I quote tweeted it with, you better ask how many haven't. Mm-hmm. Like it's not how many, it's how many per year are you, like, rabid dog down the street, guy with a gun 5 miles away, like they're all lockdown. I mean, they're the soft lockdowns, but like, we lock down often, you know.
Yes.
I don't feel like people not in schools know that. Like, this is a psychological trauma we're forcing upon our children often. So
I also think it's a very unique experience to being an educator. It's difficult to describe to people what it's like with a large group of children just being children. And in my experience, most of whom aren't very inclined to take it seriously because they too have been used to doing it. And it just becomes part of the routine. And I think they forget, or they're just not considering because they're kids. And, sometimes we forget too why we're doing it.
Yeah. Well, and it's a very healthy coping mechanism for people at that developmental stage to joke about it, to goof off.
Yes.
That's a very appropriate thing for a 12-year-old to do in the face of trauma. It's an appropriate thing for a 52-year-old to do in the face of trauma. Some people use humor to process. So it's, anyway, we could talk all day about the horror of guns in America. So I'll use that as a transition to my first question for you. You said, I tried to scribble it down quickly because it was one of the most profound things I've heard in a while. You said something along the lines of, when I can't think how to talk about something, that's a poem that needs to be written. And that was essentially the question I wanted to lead off with. As I was telling you before we hit record, the first question is usually something craft oriented or about your work. And since we are kind of diving into the grief angle today, back up a step. This episode will air, I actually did some math. It'll probably be in August because we're doing every other week. So I was debating, first episode airs this coming week. So it'll be 1 week after this big shooting. I was debating delaying the whole season, right? Because like poetry and novels are fun, but like I feel like in some way we should be dedicating 100% of our extra time and effort to helping. I'm trying hard to stay a little bit apolitical. I appreciate you're the guest. You don't have to. I appreciate that you didn't. As the host, I feel like I should try at least to stay a little apolitical. So I debated even running this season yet, or if we should wait. And then I realized, I get that. And I love that some literary journals are doing that. But at the same time, I feel like art is a way to help us deal and process. This is also the COVID season. We started recording these, I was in isolation in one of our bedrooms upstairs, positive with COVID. Me and my 8-year-old brought it home from school. Thankfully, we're the only two that got it. We kept it away from the other two because we did a hard isolation upstairs. So most of these I recorded while I was up in a bedroom upstairs. So it's like, it's grief after grief after grief. You write about that. Please talk with us about how writing about grief helps or doesn't help process it. I guess the short version of my question is, why and how do you write about such hard things?
Wow, what a question.
Right?
The why. So I have to just spend a moment talking about who I am as a person, I think, because that is really going to be part of the answer to that question. I was a very, very quiet child. I think partly it's the way that I'm wired, but it was also a response to my environment and a coping strategy for the family that I lived in and the house that I lived in. What ended up happening as a result of that is I needed a way to be human as I was existing in my silent little world. And as soon as I started to learn how to read, I started to write. So I think I wrote my first poem when I was five or six. I've been doing this my whole life, and I don't really, I make jokes often in my life with friends that I don't do feelings, which is a weird thing to say considering, the depth of emotion in almost all of my work. But I don't do feelings in the way that I see a lot of people around me able to do feelings, which is, something sad happens and then you cry. Or something makes you angry and you react. For me, everything emotionally is very measured, and I tend to distance myself from emotions in order to process them. So I've been doing that my whole life. The why and the how, I don't, other than explaining it that way, I'm not sure how to answer that part of it. But my process for writing these very difficult poems is often to ask myself what needs to be written. Some of the most difficult poems that I've ever written took me years to write, not in terms of the actual writing process, but the figuring out what poem needed to exist and the form it needed to exist. So the most recent version of that would be, actually, there are two. One I just finished yesterday, and that was about school shootings. And I think that poem has been burgeoning inside of me since Sandy Hook, because Sandy Hook is about 30 minutes from my house. I had an infant, a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old at that time, and I was not working. I was taking care of my children at home for a short period of time. So I didn't experience that as a classroom teacher. This time I did. And I think both of those experiences made it necessary for me to write a poem that processed that in the two different ways. The other example of that is a poem I wrote called Elegy for My Sister's Journal, which is in Night Swim, and it was published in Nell. It was a finalist for a couple of different awards, but it didn't find a home. It was one of the last poems in the book to find a publication prior to the book being published. And that poem is about being given my sister's journals and other crime scene materials after she died. My sister died, took her life 2 months after my nephew did, and she took her life in a hotel room in Troy. So when I received those materials, I think a lot of people would have been very interested right away in what a journal said. And because of who I am as a person, which is, I don't do feelings, and I'm extremely stubborn, and I was very angry at my sister. I was like, fuck that. I am not reading that. I want nothing to do with that. Someone suggested burning it. I was like, I'm not going to even give her the satisfaction of burning it. It is going to sit in a box in my attic. I mean, it's like funny, but it's like just horrible too. And it did, until I wrote Night Swim and my editor looked at it and said, this book is missing some poems. And here are the poems I think that it's missing. And one of them was about details about my sister's suicide, which I didn't know because I refused to read the crime scene report and I refused to read her journal. So I opened that box for poetry, and I read it, and I read through all of it. And once I read through all of it, I wrote Elegy for My Sister's Journal, which is about the process of not reading it. So I don't know if that answers that question. I did the best that I could. It basically, I write poems about the worst feelings that you have. And oftentimes I write them about feelings other people have told me I should not have, such as rage. The rage, the entire section on anger in Night Swim, which is, you've read it, so it's categorized into the stages of grief. The entire section on anger, boy, did that make people angry at me.
Really? That's interesting.
Oh, yes. And I'm not going to talk about the specifics of that because I don't want to give it any energy. This is a big middle finger to people who might still be stalking me because they think that my sister was an angel and I should have regarded her that way. And the truth is, my sister was a human being. There were wonderful things about her. There were terrible things about her. Both of them are true. And I can remember both of those things, and I can write about both of those things. And people who have reached out to me about the book most often mention how the poems helped them feel the things they felt they weren't allowed to feel, whatever that is for them. And that was, when I wrote the book, I was like 90% sure it was never going to be published because of the anger poems, because of the way that we are supposed to regard suicide victims, which I don't even like that term for a lot of different reasons. But I said, you know what? This is the book. This is the book. I'm going to send it out. I won't stop sending it out. People are going to read it and be like, wow, she's fucked up, and just toss it. But it ended up finding the perfect place. Like, Patty Payne at Diode is an absolutely amazing human being. By the way, their chapbook and full-length reading period is happening right now. And I can't really imagine the book anywhere else. They got it. She got it. She understood it. So that's a very... Go ahead.
I was just gonna say Diode puts out great stuff. I mean, that did not surprise me that your book came out on Diode.
Yeah, they're amazing.
I want to bounce back real quick to you said, like, I'm not sure if that answered the question. I think that profoundly answered the question, really.
Okay.
Because, kind of like you were just saying about your sister, like, everything is both good and bad, right? And like, writing about grief is both good and bad. Like, I think it's really amazing the way you walked us through your sister's journals storyline, kind of the behind the scenes of that poem. Like, in a sense, like, this is kind of the thing you saw me sort of thinking out loud on Twitter about this, and then the behind the scenes on whether we should postpone the season. Like, art helps us process, but sometimes we don't want it to, we don't want to process. And my 2 cents, again, I'm getting vaguely political here again, is that we as a nation are refusing to process any of this grief. We're kind of a nation of toddlers developmentally, like we refuse to even face what's going on and just move it past the news cycle as quickly as possible. And that's kind of a mean way of putting it. I mean, I shouldn't say toddlers, just that, like, facing grief is hard. And I get frustrated because our culture often refuses to do that. I love how your story put a very personal, detailed focus on, like, yeah, that it is hard to do, but once you do it, you can unlock, like, new levels of understanding. And I also love the point you made just about, like, I say this to my own kids all the time, whenever we break the news of one of these things to them. And I should preface, my kids are 12 and 8, so they're still in that stage where things tend to be black and white, like, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And they're old enough that I've started very purposely trying to explain, like, everybody's good and bad. Like, there's good and bad in everyone. Our heroes make mistakes, and our villains are loved by someone, so there's good and bad everywhere. It's not that simple. And I really, really wish we as a culture could at least start there, at, like, the 8-year-old's developmental level of understanding that things are complex and that's okay. And let's go from there and move forward.
I think there's, just to kind of piggyback on that, I think there's a danger in the way that we also regard violent people, because there's this desire to vilify them. And I understand that it's absolutely horrible, but I want to understand why this keeps happening. What is it? What do they have in common? It's not about one insane person, or, nothing is simple or black and white. And so understanding what are the patterns, what are the connections, like, what are we missing? and what are we not doing? I think is a more important question than vilifying anybody. And I'm not in any way saying like, oh, there were good things about the shooter and bad things. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are complex stories that need to be recognized, combed through, analyzed, and understood so that we can understand as a country what we need to do, or what we can do.
It's the goofiness of this lone wolf theory. Like, you can't have 300 lone wolves. So you're like, we've had almost mass shootings just this year, and it's spring, so like there's no lone there, that's a massive pattern. Okay, the second question is usually lighthearted, and let's go there, because we've been talking about heavy stuff, which is good, necessary. I am not saying talking about heavy stuff is bad in any way, shape, or form. But the second question tends to be a goofy one. You are a Michigan expat, and I often like to kind of embrace our guests who are from Michigan at some point in time, and some of our viewers are locals. So you're in Connecticut now, right? If you were back in Oakland County, what would be what's the first place you would go? Like, what do you miss? If you're back, you've got free time.
I have an answer to that.
Free time, where do you go?
Big Boy's Restaurant. Big Boy's Restaurant.
Was not expecting that.
Every day. I go there in my head every day because of the hot fudge ice cream cake. Okay, so let's talk about that. 2-inch thick layers of chocolate cake, vanilla ice cream, another layer of 2-inch chocolate cake, hot fudge that's not, I don't think it's a real food. There's a chemical flavoring that is just perfection. And then you pour that over that. And then like a mountain of like fake whipped cream with a cherry on top and the juice. I wrote a poem about this. I have a poem about Big Boy's Restaurant. It's on the Hellbore right now. It's called Ode to Big Boy's Hot Fudge Ice Cream Cake. This is not a joke.
This is fantastic.
I also wrote a poem about Pizza Hut in the 1980s. So somebody asked me the other day, do you ever write love poems? I was like, for food? I mean, I guess. I mean, like, those are the only love poems I've ever written is for like food. There's no Big Boys here.
Yeah.
There's no Pizza Hut. It's all sad. It's just sadness in terms of chain junk food. It's very, so that's where I would go.
Nothing but Dunkin' Donuts out there, huh?
Ugh. Yeah, not a fan. I mean, the coffee's all right. I stopped going because I have no money.
I mean, if you got limited resources, you can do better than Dunkin' Donuts. No offense to the Dunkin' Donuts stands out there. It has its place, but
yes,
if funds are tight, I would save up for something else as well.
So that's my answer. My second answer, can I have a second answer?
Sure.
Okay. My second answer is I would go visit my 9th grade English teacher, who is more of a father to me than he's more of a father to me than a teacher. And he really has saved me several times in my life. First as a young adult when I met him when I was 14, after I'm trying not to talk about certain things because I don't want to give it energy. But after a very, very difficult period in my life with family, he was there and found me, and he basically approached me in the classroom. His name is Mark Honeyman, and he just retired a couple of years ago, but he taught in Bloomfield Hills. And he came up to me in the classroom with his hands on his hips and said, "This writing is unacceptable. I insist that you write beautifully." And I was like, what? I was getting a C in English in the 9th grade. And he told me, he said, if you can get a B- in my class, I'm going to recommend you for honors English. And I was like, wow, you think I could do that?
Yeah.
And he was like, I know you can. What's wrong with you? Why would you think that you can't? And I was like, wow, I kind of like him and I don't want him to be mad at me. And like, being smart would be kind of cool. And it literally changed my life, and he came to my sister's funeral and he was the first person there in the morning and the last person to leave. And he came to my nephew's wake and funeral and was the first person there and the last person to leave. And I went to AWP and I did an offsite reading, and he showed up. He drove 14 hours to see me read poetry at a little bookstore in Philadelphia. So Mark Honeyman and Big Boys.
That I got nothing. That was amazing. I can't believe you asked in the middle of like your answers were adequate or something. Like that's some of the most profound stuff. I kind of want to like let's go do a GoFundMe to get you and Mark Honeyman at a Big Boy in like let's I guess this will air in August. Let's get this Labor Day weekend. Let's get
Joan that's hilarious.
Honeyman at Big Boy for dessert. That was fantastic. All right, I'll wrap this up here because it is, as we record this, a Saturday in May, and you probably have other things to do than put up with me. But man, Joan, thank you so much for. I mean, you made Big Boy's hot fudge sundae profound. That was fantastic.
Listen, why aren't you there right now? You live there.
Oh my God. So we one last thing and then I'll shut us down. So you were talking earlier about like you don't do feelings, right? I am by birth and raising heritage, however you want to put it, a Lutheran farm boy. So
I went to a Lutheran school. I went to Good Shepherd Lutheran in Birmingham, and I got kicked out. But I did go there.
Yeah. So I mean, we have a lot of things in common. Among them are the fact that we don't do feelings, right?
Yeah.
And then you do. I mean, like feelings happen whether you want them to or not. So like I could not have identified with that little Midwestern slice more, like, oh, I don't do feelings. Like where they're in there, we just never talk about them. But we would go to church, and again, we're dairy farmers, so we couldn't go every Sunday because like somebody was on shift. Like my dad would be out there.
Oh, you're being literal right now.
I'm being very literal.
You're a farmer.
So we couldn't go to church every week. So when we did, it was kind of a big deal. It tended to be every other week, and we would go to Big Boy after most services. We'd go to the early service because dairy farmers. So you're at church
Nice.
at 7 a.m.
Okay.
Which leaves plenty of time to go out for breakfast afterwards. So we would go to Big Boy, and it's breakfast, so you can't really get a hot fudge sundae, really, because pancakes, hot fudge sundae, kind of the same thing. But our culture is what it is, it's like poo-poo, couldn't order it. But I would stare at that MFer in the menu every week. Like the photo they had for the item you're talking about was the most gloriously prepared photo you've ever seen. It glistened perfectly. So I've only eaten the hot fudge sundae at Big Boy maybe once, twice in my life, but I obsessed over it easily 300 times. So I knew exactly the picture. As you were telling us about that, I could see it in the menu.
Oh, it really is. It really is glorious.
I may have to go. I may have to go do that. I mean, I feel like sometimes we don't take advantage of adulthood. Like I could go do that this afternoon. Like
I could.
Well, circle us right back to grief. We're actually still waiting on a PCR test for our 12-year-old. We're still waiting on results.
Oh, got
so
it.
We can't go anywhere yet because we're in the middle of this huge surge that nobody acknowledges. Blah blah blah. America's. There we go. We're full circle, right back where we started.
Well, thank you so much. This was a really, this was really good. I needed this today. I'm really also grateful to have gotten to know you a little bit better. And just thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing it. This has been a real treat. I'll leave it at that. It's one of the great pleasures of my life, hosting the show and getting to actually talk to people whose writing I like and whose Twitter feeds I follow, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Mitch.
Yeah. All right, viewers, we'll see you next time. Take care.